So for those times that you can't do the experimental method and you can't manipulate the IV, there are things called descriptive and correlational methods. So this really permits the investigator to see if there's a link or an association between variables of interest, right? They can't necessarily now say one causes the other. Okay. So, like I said, it's used when researchers can't manipulate the variables under study, and so they would rather just learn if there is an association here, but you have to be very careful because you can't say that one thing caused the other. Okay, so now you look at two variables, and both of these have to be things that are continuous, meaning that you no longer have levels now. You're just going to have one IV that associates with the other. And if they are related or associated, then it's called correlated. And there is a number that goes with this, the correlation coefficient. It's a statistic that's actually going to tell you the degree of the relationship, and it's a number between 0 or 1. And that tells you the strength of the relationship. The closer that the number is to 1, the more strong the relationship is between the two variables. And then there's also a positive or a negative, and that tells you in what direction this relationship goes. So let me show you an example. Okay, so for example, these are positive correlations, meaning that the number would be positive. And so there's something like, say, high school GPA and college GPA. If I were to collect all of the students' high school GPA and then collect their current college GPA, this would be correlated. And so this is a positive correlation because as high school GPA goes up, it is likely that your college GPA is going to go up, right? And also, as I look further down, as college GPA, high school GPA goes down, you're also going to see college GPA go down. It's more likely to go down, at least. So although positive correlation might make you think that it can only go upwards, it just means that they're both going in the same direction. So now let me talk about what a negative correlation is. So a negative correlation means as one goes up, the other goes down. So as absences goes up in a class, exam scores tend to go down, right? Or another way to say that, as someone reaches more and more absences, they are more likely to have a decreased exam score, right? Or as absences go down, exam scores go up. So this is a negative correlation because it means that as one variable goes up, the other variable goes down. They're going in an opposite direction. Okay, so as I said, the strength is something slightly different. So again, the relationship can be anywhere from 0 to 1 or 0 to -1. And so this tells you how strong of a relationship this is. So if it's, say, only correlated at, say, 0.1 to 0.3 or 4, then that's considered, pretty low correlation, that these two things don't strongly predict each other. Moderate correlations would be in this 4 to 6, 0.4 to 0.6 or 7. And then anything above 0.7 is considered a really high correlation, right? So that means that you can predict with high accuracy. If you give one of, say, for example, if you have someone's high school GPA, then that means with high accuracy you could predict their college GPA if it were, say, here in the 8.9 or 1. Versus if it were 0.1 or 0.2, then you would say, well, if I have their high school GPA, I can, I have a very low predictive accuracy of predicting their college GPA. And of course, this is the same on the other side. It's just negative. So it's still a low correlation here, or moderate or high. So again, that would be like the absences. So say if it were at 0.8, that, the number of absences predicted a GPA, then I could say I can tell you how many absences you've had in your class. I can tell you with some accuracy the likelihood of your exam score, right? But as one goes up, the other goes down. So that's why it's negative. So this is basically what I just said. The higher the correlation coefficient, the increased ability you have to predict a variable. So for example, like SAT scores are only moderately correlated with the first year of college GPA. It's actually around a 0.4 or 0.5. So that means that SAT scores only moderately predict your college GPA. Now, again, you have to be careful. You can't imply causation because you didn't manipulate anything. So you can say that these things are highly correlated and highly predicted, but you can't say one causes the other. So I can't say that absences in class cause these students to be worse test takers, right? Um, but you instead you can just say these two things are associated. So, for example, there's a lot of studies out there that have found a positive correlation between smoking and depression, meaning that as people smoke, they are more likely to be depressed. But is it that smoking causes depression, or is it that depression causes somebody to smoke? We don't know because this is a correlational study, and one that would be difficult to do because we couldn't ethically force people to smoke and then force people not to smoke and record their depression scores, but that's how you would do it in an experimental design. So instead, we just have to say that these two things are associated, but we don't necessarily know which one came first. And then on top of that, there's a thing called the third variable problem, which means that we don't actually know if it's either of these two things causing each other. There could be a third variable causing both. So this is what this would look like. So you know your x and your y, that's the things that you're correlating, but there could be some unknown variable, here we call it z, that's actually correlating with both of these. That's causing both of these, I should say. So for example, like I said, we know smoking and depression are both associated, but it might not be that depression is causing smoking or that smoking is causing depression. It might be that neuroticism, which is a personality trait, that neuroticism is actually causing people to both want to smoke and be more depressed, right? So another example of this is that there's a research study out there that shows that that ice cream sales are correlated with aggressive acts. So if we were to erroneously imply that there's a causation here, then you would think, okay, so eating ice cream causes people to get angry, or people who are angry really want to eat ice cream. But really, there's a third variable here, which is the summertime. So people tend to eat more ice cream in the summer, but also kids are out of school and there's a lot more free time. And so there's more possibilities for maybe kids to get into trouble during the summer as well. So that's a perfect third variable problem where if you were to assume causation, then you would have erroneously assumed it. Okay, and so lastly, I'm going to talk about a couple other options of research study. One is called the naturalistic observation, and this is where a researcher tries to, stand back and just observe behavior without actually intervening with the subjects. So, for example, there's a research study that I know of that looked at the pace of life in 31 countries. This was done by Levine and Norazan in 1999. So what they did is they would just sit back and observe the average walking speed in a downtown location. They would look at the accuracy of public clocks, and then they would look at the speed at which the postal clerk completed a simple request. And so they would look at these things and then deem kind of the pace of life in these countries. Now, they don't actually manipulate anything. They just wanted to see what it looked like in these countries. So that would be an example of a naturalistic observation. And then there's a case study, and this is an in-depth investigation of an individual subject, but it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be on one person. It just means that each person in the study has an in-depth investigation. So you might bring people in, say, who were depressed and were possibly going to commit suicide, and you want to look at, why were they wanting to commit suicide? You want to get a really detailed request or detailed description of what's going on. You want to ask all about what happened prior, and you want to have a huge mental evaluation and ask their families and friends. So these are, an example. Or again, for sex-related study, they did a lot of this during the HIV epidemic, where they would look at, transsexuals and homosexual men. They would look at their brains and have a really in-depth investigation of their prior history and see if we could learn information about men post-mortem, of course, after they died, so that they could look at their brains to see if we could find any brain differences in these individuals. So that again would be an example of a case study. Okay, and then lastly, I'm going to talk about survey research. And this is just, trying to use questionnaires and interviews to gather information. So in survey research, you still might have an independent variable that you're manipulating, but it's really you're asking, questionnaires after to get, information on their behavior. So it's a way of getting people to, think about what they've done instead of having to record what they're doing. And again, this happens more often in sex research. So for example, you want to ask people, about their sexual history. That's a lot easier than bringing them into the lab and actually watching them have sex, for example, intercourse. Okay, so now let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages of correlational research. So the advantage is that these questions that you're asking are typically ones that you can't examine experimentally, either because you physically can't manipulate the variable or it's far too expensive to do so. So it does give us an ability to do research on on topics that we couldn't do if we just looked at experimental data. But the disadvantage, of course, which is a large one, is that we really can't talk about cause and effect if it's something that you didn't manipulate. Okay, so that's it for my review of research methods. Feel free to email me and ask me questions if you have any comments or concerns about what you've heard. All right, thank you.